The Romans constructed numerous aqueducts in order to bring water from distant sources into their cities and towns, supplying public baths, latrines, fountains and private households. Wastewater was removed by complex sewage systems and released into nearby bodies of water, keeping the towns clean and free from effluent. Aqueducts also provided water for mining operations, milling, farms and gardens. Aqueducts moved water through gravity alone, being constructed along a slight downward gradient within conduits of stone, brick or concrete. Most were buried beneath the ground, and followed its contours. Obstructing peaks were circumvented or, less often, tunneled through. Where valleys or lowlands intervened, the conduit was carried on bridgework, or its contents fed into high-pressure lead, ceramic or stone pipes and siphoned across. Most aqueduct systems included sedimentation tanks, sluices and distribution tanks to regulate the supply at need. Rome's first aqueduct supplied a water fountain sited at the city's cattle market. By the 3rd century AD, the city had 11 aqueducts, sustaining a population of over 1 million in a water-extravagant economy. Most of the water supplied the cities are many public baths. Cities and municipalities throughout the Roman Empire emulated this model, and funded aqueducts as objects of public interest and civic pride, an expensive yet necessary luxury to which all could, and did, aspire. Smiley face. Most Roman aqueducts proved reliable and durable. Some were maintained into the early modern era, and a few are still partly in use. Methods of aqueduct surveying and construction are noted by Vitruvius in his work De Architectura. The general Frontinus gives more detail in his official report on the problems, uses and abuses of imperial Rome's public water supply. Notable examples of aqueduct architecture include the supporting piers of the Aqueduct of Segovia, and the aqueduct-fed cisterns of Constantinople. Background. The extraordinary greatness of the Roman Empire manifests itself above all in three things: the aqueducts, the paved roads, and the construction of the drains. Dionysius of Halicarnassus. Roman Antiquities. Before the development of aqueduct technology, Romans, like most of their contemporaries in the ancient world, relied on local water sources such as springs and streams, supplemented by groundwater from privately or publicly owned wells, and by seasonal rainwater drained from rooftops into storage jars and cisterns. The reliance of ancient communities upon such water resources restricted their potential growth. Rome's aqueducts were not strictly Roman inventions. Their engineers would have been familiar with the water management technologies of Rome's Etruscan neighbors and Greek allies, but they proved conspicuously successful. By the early imperial era, the city's aqueducts supported a population of over 1 million, and an extravagant water supply for public amenities had become a fundamental part of Roman life. The runoff of aqueduct water scoured the sewers of cities and towns. Water from aqueducts was also used to supply villas, ornamental urban and suburban gardens, market gardens, farms and agricultural estates, the latter being the core of Rome's economy and wealth. Rome's aqueducts. Rome had several springs within its perimeter walls, but its groundwater was notoriously unpalatable. Water from the river Tiber was badly affected by pollution and waterborne diseases. The city's demand for water had probably long exceeded its local supplies by 312 BC, when the city's first aqueduct, the Aqua Appia, was commissioned by the censor Appius Claudius Caecus. The Aqua Appia was one of two major public projects of the time. The other was a strategic road between Rome and Capua, the first leg of the so-called Appian Way. Both projects had significant strategic value, as the Third Samnite War had been underway for some 30 years by that point. The road allowed rapid troop movements, and by design or fortunate coincidence, most of the Aqua Appia ran within a buried conduit, relatively secure from attack. It was fed by a spring 16.4 kilometers from Rome, and dropped 10 meters over its length to discharge approximately 75,500 cubic meters of water each day into a fountain at Rome's cattle market, the Forum Boarium, one of the city's lowest-lying public spaces. A second aqueduct, the Old Anaya, was commissioned some 40 years later, funded by treasures seized from Pyrrhus of Epirus. Its flow was more than twice that of the Aqua Appia, and it entered the city on raised arches, supplying water to higher elevations of the city. By 145 BC, the city had again outgrown its combined supplies. An official commission found the aqueduct conduits decayed, their water depleted by leakage and illegal tapping. The praetor Quintus Marcius Rex restored them, and introduced a third, more wholesome, supply, the Aqua Marcia, Rome's longest aqueduct and high enough to supply the Capitoline Hill. The works cost 180 million sesterces, and took 2 years to complete. As demand grew still further, more aqueducts were built, the Aqua Tepula in 127 BC and the Aqua Julia in 33 BC. Aqueduct building programs reached a peak in the imperial era. Augustus' reign saw the building of the Aqua Virgo, and the short Aqua Alciotina that supplied Trastever's artificial lake with water for staged sea fights to entertain the populace. Another short Augustan aqueduct supplemented the Aqua Marcia with water of excellent quality. The Emperor Caligula added or began 2 aqueducts, completed by his successor, Claudius, the 69 kilometers Aqua Claudia, which gave good quality water but failed on several occasions, and the Anaya Novis, highest of all Rome's aqueducts and one of the most reliable but prone to muddy, discolored waters, particularly after rain. Despite its use of settling tanks, most of Rome's water supply drew on various springs in the valley and highlands of the Anaya, the modern river Anine, east of the Tiber. A complex system of aqueduct junctions, tributary feeds and distribution tanks supplied every part of the city. Trastevere, the city region west of the Tiber, was primarily served by extensions of several of the city's eastern aqueducts, carried across the river by lead pipes buried in the roadbed of the river bridges, thus forming an inverted siphon. Whenever this cross-river supply had to be shut down for routine repair and maintenance works, the positively unwholesome waters of the Aqua Alciotina were used to supply Trastever's public fountains. The situation was finally ameliorated when the Emperor Trajan built the Aqua Traiana in 109 AD. Bringing clean water directly to Trastevere from aquifers around Lake Bracciano. By the late 3rd century AD, the city was supplied with water by 11 state-funded aqueducts. Aqueducts in the Roman Empire. Hundreds of similar aqueducts were built throughout the Roman Empire, although the systems were not as extensive as those supplying Rome itself. Many of them have since collapsed or been destroyed, but a number of intact portions remain. 2 notable surviving aqueducts are the Pont du Gard in France and the Aqueduct of Segovia in Spain. Planning, surveying and construction. Sources and surveying springs were by far the most common sources for aqueduct water. Most of Rome's supply came from various springs in the Naya Valley and its uplands. Spring water was fed into a stone or concrete spring house from uphill, then entered the aqueduct conduit. If water was brought in from some distance, the territory over which the aqueduct would run must be carefully surveyed to ensure that the water would flow at an acceptable gradient for the entire distance. Scattered springs would require several branch conduits feeding into a main channel. In Book 8 of his De Architectura, Vitruvius describes the need to ensure a constant supply, methods of prospecting, and tests for potable water. Various surveying tools were employed to plot the course of aqueducts across the landscape. Horizontal levels were checked using a chorobates, a flat-bedded wooden frame fitted with a water level. Courses and angles could be plotted and checked using a groma, a relatively simple apparatus that was probably displaced by the more sophisticated dioptra, precursor of the modern theodolite. health issues. The association between stagnant waters and waterborne disease was well known. Greek and Roman physicians knew the adverse health effects of lead on those who mined and processed it, and for this reason, ceramic pipes were preferred over lead. Where lead pipes were used, a continuous water flow and the inevitable deposition of waterborne minerals within the pipes reduced the water's contamination by soluble lead. Nevertheless, as recent research shows, the level of lead in this water continued to be 100 times higher than in local spring waters. Conduits and gradients. Most Roman aqueducts were flat-bottomed, arch-section conduits that ran 0.5 to 1 meter beneath the ground surface, with inspection and access covers at regular intervals. Conduits above ground level were usually slab-topped. Early conduits were ashlar-built, but from around the late Republican era, brick-faced concrete was often used instead. The concrete used for conduit linings was usually waterproof. The flow of water depended on gravity alone. The volume of water transported within the conduit depended on the catchment hydrology, rainfall, absorption, and runoff, the cross-section of the conduit, and its gradient. Most conduits ran about 2/3 full. The conduit's cross-section was also determined by maintenance requirements. Workmen must be able to enter and access the hole, with minimal disruption to its fabric. Vitruvius recommends a low gradient of not less than 1 in 4,800 for the channel, presumably to prevent damage to the structure through erosion and water pressure. This value agrees well with the measured gradients of surviving masonry aqueducts. The gradient of the Pont du Gard is only 34 cm per kilometer, descending only 17 meters vertically in its entire length of 50 kilometers. It could transport up to 20,000 cubic meters a day. The gradients of temporary aqueducts used for hydraulic mining could be considerably greater, as at Dolorcothi in Wales and Las Medulas in northern Spain, where sharp gradients were unavoidable in permanent conduits. The channel could be stepped downwards, widened or discharged into a receiving tank to disperse the flow of water and reduce its abrasive force. The use of step cascades and drops also helped reoxygenate and thus freshen the water. The combined conduit length of the aqueducts in the city of Rome is estimated between 780 to a little over 800 kilometers, of which approximately 47 kilometers were carried above ground level on masonry supports. They supplied around 1 million cubic meters a day, a capacity 126% of the current water supply of the city of Bangalore, which has a population of 6 million. The longest Roman aqueduct system was that associated with the Valens Aqueduct, Constantinople. The known system is at least 2.5 times the length of the longest recorded Roman aqueducts at Carthage and Cologne. But perhaps more significantly, it represents one of the most outstanding surveying achievements of any pre-industrial society. The Zaghawan Aqueduct is 92.5 kilometers in length. It was built in the 2nd century to supply Carthage. Bridgework and siphons conduits can be supported across valleys or hollows on arches of masonry, brick or concrete. The Pont du Gard, one of the most impressive surviving examples of a massive masonry multiple-period conduit, also served as a road bridge. Where particularly deep or lengthy depressions had to be crossed, inverted siphons could be used instead. Here, the conduit terminated in a header tank which fed the water into pipes. These crossed the valley at lower level, supported by a low venter bridge, rose to a receiving tank at a slightly lower elevation and discharged into another conduit. The overall gradient was maintained. Siphon pipes were usually made of soldered lead, sometimes reinforced by concrete encasements or stone sleeves. Less often, the pipes themselves were stone or ceramic, jointed as male-female and sealed with lead. Vitruvius describes the construction of siphons and the problems of blockage, blowouts and venting at their lowest levels, where the pressures were greatest. Nonetheless, siphons were versatile and effective if well built and well maintained. A horizontal section of high-pressure siphon tubing in the aqueduct of the Gir was ramped up on bridgework to clear a navigable river, using 9 lead pipes in parallel, cased in concrete. Modern hydraulic engineers use similar techniques to enable sewers and water pipes to cross depressions. Inspection, maintenance and regulation. Roman aqueducts required a comprehensive system of regular maintenance, to repair accidental breaches, to clear the conduits of gravel and other loose debris, and to remove channel narrowing accretions of calcium carbonate in systems fed by hard water sources. Inspection and access points were provided at regular intervals on the standard buried conduits. Siphons that used hard water supplies would have presented particular maintenance problems, due to the narrow diameter of their pipes, but lead, ceramic and stone pipes were made in fairly short lengths whose damaged or blocked sections could be replaced or cleared. Some had sealed openings that might have been used as rodding eyes, possibly using a pull-through device. Little is known of the day-to-day business of aqueduct maintenance teams. Theirs was probably a demanding and never-ending routine, punctuated by occasional emergencies. Full closure of any aqueduct for servicing would have been a rare event, kept as brief as possible, with repairs preferably made when water demand was lowest, which was presumably at night. Some form of registry was probably kept of licensed, fee-paying private users, and the bore of pipe that led water from the public supply to their private property. The wider the pipe, the greater the flow and the greater the fee. Tampering and fraud to avoid or reduce payment were commonplace. Methods included the fitting of unlicensed outlets, additional outlets, and the illegal widening of lead pipes, any of which might involve the bribery or connivance of unscrupulous aqueduct officials or workers. Official lead pipes carried inscriptions with information on the pipe's manufacturer, its fitter, and probably on its subscriber and their entitlement. During the imperial era, the granting of rights to draw water for private use from official aqueducts was made an imperial privilege.